So I've been asked to start a little bit earlier at 10 to 4 for our last really wonderful talk of the day, connecting directly to Maria Gimbutas, which has been a really special part of the whole day. But Joan Marler has a quite important and interesting story to tell about her. So I'm going to offer the introduction that Joan provided for me to her work. Joan, in the front row here, is the founder, an executive director of the Institute of Archaeomythology. She's the editor of The Civilization of the Goddess. Do I need to say any more? I mean, that's an extraordinary thing. And another book called From the Realm of the Ancestors, an anthology in honor of Maria Gimbutas. She worked closely with Maria as her personal editor from 1987 to 1994 and lectures internationally on Maria Gimbutas' life and work. She's initiated courses at the Archaeomythology Institute and 2 graduate schools in San Francisco, the New College of California, and the California Institute of Integral Studies. She taught modern folk and ethnic dance for 28 years through the Santa Rosa Junior College in Northern California. From 1982 to 1996, she worked as an independent producer and radio journalist for KPFA-FM, Berkeley, California. So please welcome Joan Marler.
It's a pleasure to be here and to find so many people who have stayed the entire day. Wow, what stamina you must have. And I want to welcome the people here who are long-distance viewers. It's really great to have you as well. We can feel your presence over the airwaves, or over they're not airwaves anymore, are they? Whatever they are. The ether, yeah. So it really is my pleasure to be speaking about Maria Gimbutas. And this is a photograph of hers taken in 1984 outside of CIIS. She was getting ready to give a whole weekend seminar, and in which she gave me permission to record the whole thing for radio, which was really great. And afterwards, I interviewed her and also had an interview. That interview was on KPFA. And during the course of our meeting and subsequent meetings with her, she invited me to, well, first of all, she checked me out. She wanted to know, have you done any editing before? I said, oh, yes, I have. And she said, well, would you be interested in doing a little bit of editing for me? She wanted to see if I could work with her. And I said, sure, that'd be great. So she started sending me articles. And that led to her sending me parts of the manuscript of The Civilization of the Goddess, which changed my life, of course. One page after another. It was just phenomenal. And I so often think, if I only knew then what I know now, there are so many things I could have asked her, but my knowledge base was limited at that time. And I didn't have the benefit of all these decades of study and continuing to study and travel and so on. Nevertheless, we do what we can whenever we can. So I would like just to start with, since she's standing in front of CIIS, to recognize Eleanor Gaydon, who was one of the first organizers of the Women's Spirituality Program at CIIS and the author of The Once and Future Goddess, which is used for this event. And what a great thing to have this event. I'm so grateful to Lance and to others who were part of the development of this event, and to know that all that is said today and all that will happen tomorrow are considered important. And of course, they have to be considered important, but they're really highlighted in a very dynamic way. So I hope that everyone, I trust that everybody who's here has been inspired, and everyone who is online will equally be inspired. And then this material will be available over time, which is even better. So I also basically want to recognize Carol Christ, because it was she was on my dissertation committee, and unfortunately she passed away just before she was to present in 1980. What decade is this? I'm I always get confused with all of the various decades and millennia and all that we're dealing with all the time. But Maria's 100th birthday was 2021, so 2021. So there was a big party, lots of big parties for her. And one of them was put together with the Institute of Archaeomythology in collaboration with the Association for the Study of Women in Mythology. And Carol was to give a presentation for that, and it was just right before that she passed away. But before she passed away, being on my committee, she admonished me in no uncertain terms that what I had to do, among whatever else I did with this dissertation, was to study and explain what it was about her colleagues in archaeology, particularly those from Britain and from the United States, that made it very difficult for particularly the male archaeologists, but not just the male archaeologists, to have a hard time understanding her definitions and her interpretations of prehistory, and particularly the female images of prehistory. In fact, not long after she passed away, the murmurs that were beginning before she passed away bloomed into a full-scale backlash. And what was that about? Because it has been so virulent. And I have to say that one time I was visiting the British Museum and I found this book about the goddesses. I thought, oh, this is great. It was just off the press, published by the British Museum. And I bought it and I opened it up and I was completely shocked. I thought I was going to die. I mean, it was like a bomb went out inside of me, because it was an expression of the most difficult for me to take put down of Maria that I had ever thought could even be possible. So I went around being really depressed for a while, and finally I heard this voice, and I think it must have been Maria talking to me, or at least the Maria that lives within me, advising me, and she said, knock it off. just stop doing that. What you need to do is to study it. And then it becomes fascinating, absolutely fascinating. So follow it as far as you possibly can. Inquire into it as a scholar, as the scholar that you are. Scholar in action, scholar in process. So I did, and everything changed for me. So I'm not going to go into any kind of depth about the controversy, except to say that it continues to be extremely important for me to continue to understand. And I have a lot of work that I've given myself for the future that will basically continue that work to understand it. Now, but about this question, about this admonition, and I say in terms of admonition that came from Carol, because it was so strong that I had to study and make this exploration of what the problems were with this interpretation that Maria had given to the world. Really had a lot to do with what she carried within herself, of what she referred to as her ancestors. What the Baltic ancestors gave her that came down through not only the Baltic prehistoric period, but all the way into the historic period and all the way through the peoples that were living in Lithuania, still in living in the old way, and through the time that she was a child, young person. And what it was that she absorbed from them. And that was the basis of what is at the core of her interpretations. And I'm going to talk a bit about that. So during the course of, before she was born, her parents and her extended family were living under Tsarist rule, under the rule of the Russians, who, in their typical manner, were hell-bent on taking the people who represented various ethnic groups and trying to just iron their ethnicity out of them and make them good little obedient Russians. And so there were quite a few of the Lithuanians that were kowtowing to that because they really wanted to be able to survive, and they didn't want to be threatened by, what they were being threatened with in terms of not being able to succeed. But there were others coming particularly from the peasant societies, who were the closest to the land, who were growing the food, who had their hands in the dirt, who continued a lot of the patterns and rituals from the old world, who also were beginning to study their own language, and not just speaking their own language, not just singing the songs of their own language, not just repeating the rituals of their own language in their own language, but also to become educated, become literate in Russian, and literate in a way that they could do translations, and also to realize there's something very deep and very unique about Lithuanian language that they were not willing to lose. And what is that? At the center of that is their connection to the living world. At the center of that is the way their nuanced language system is able to express their experience, their lived experience, and the lived experience of their ancestors, and continue that awareness. And they realize that if they lose that, they might as well they've lost themselves, because their identity and their sense of who they are in relationship to the living world would be lost. And actually, a very small percentage of the Lithuanians who were faced with basically give me liberty or give me death, you might say, were dealing with it in such a way that they were risking everything. Now, I wanted to show this image to you here. It's a sculpture that stands about from the floor to here. It's quite large. And it is, I photographed it in the home of Maria's brother, Vytautas, in Vilnius. And it is a sculpture that shows the wife, the woman of the house, with the child on her lap, being the one teaching the child to read, teaching literacy to the child in Lithuanian language, because Lithuanian language was not allowed to be printed and taught within the Russian context, unless it was in Cyrillic, which they didn't want to do. They didn't want to get any step closer to what is Russian. They wanted to do it in their own way. And so that whatever they had that was printed, that was not in Cyrillic, they could go to prison, or they could be taken to Siberia, or they could be shot. It was very, very serious. So they were risking everything. And so here's the dog underneath the seat. The dog is listening for the gendarme, and then would give a bark, and everything would be put away. And they would be pretending they weren't doing anything wrong. And this piece is named National School. Now, once again before Maria was born. Here are her parents, who were absolutely dynamic. So she inherited their dynamism. She inherited their, you can see in there, especially in her mother, Victoria Yanulaitite Alsakiene, who by the time she was she knew she wanted to be a physician, and girls were not to be physicians, but she got her older brothers to help her. Her father had already passed away, and she lived on almost nothing to go down to lower part of Europe to study in Berlin, to study in other locations, and to earn a degree in medicine and with a specialty in ocular surgery. And she became the very first female physician of any kind in Lithuania during the early years of the 20th century, and also was considered a miracle worker because she was able to cure people's sight through very, very, very early ocular, how should we say, very basically removing the cataracts. Thank you. Having one of these senior moments, and then having to deal with how do they see through the because there was no sophisticated way of fixing the situation after that, but she found ways. This is her father, Daniela Salseca, who was. Both of them actually formed the very, very first Lithuanian hospital, and that's a big, big, big story of how they got everything down from at the end of the First World War, 18 loads of equipment, hospital equipment, all the way down to Vilnius, and setting the whole thing up because they knew that this would be necessary because it was chaos. It was chaos in Lithuania. Particularly in the Vilnius area. So they had this hospital, and but her father was not only the head of the hospital, but he was already always a writer and an historian, and he had a newspaper that he published, and he was a great communicator. He was the head of the Lithuanian people who were resisting occupation, because by the time Maria was born in 1921, they were under not Tsarist rule anymore, because they were liberated from the Tsar, but the Poles had come in, so they were under Polish occupation. So it was one occupation after another, after another, after another, and how to remain free, how to be able to think about their situation and find ways to maintain their dignity, maintain their identity, and to continue. So here's Maria, little baby Maria. Birute Alsakaite. And Birute was basically a Lithuanian goddess. Some see her as basically the mother of Vytautas the Great, and also she was also described as a priestess of the special sacred place, and she would keep the fires, ancient fires, going until she was abducted by Vytautas himself and made to be his queen, and all lots of different overlapping stories about who she was, but Baruta is her namesake here. And so here is the baby who was taken by their mother, Veronica, to the sea, the Black Sea, and when she was several months old, and then basically a pagan baptism, you might say, and then before being taken to the place where that is sacred to Beruta. And is this little girl who grew up listening to the songs and stories that were told to her by people who were hired to take care of her. And these were mostly the young ladies who were from the peasants, who inherited this rich tradition of songs and stories and lore and so on. So this is ancient Vilnius, the very first capital, the early capital of Lithuania, and I wanted you to have a glimpse the old city because at the time when she was growing up there, she said she was in love with this city. And why was she so in love with this city? It was a phenomenal, phenomenal place because it was a sanctuary for many, many different ethnic groups who could take refuge there from persecution because they were allowed to be free, to be able to live their own lives and to be able to continue their traditions, continue whatever was part of their identity with who they were. And there were so many languages, many, 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 many languages. Any time of the day or night, there were songs and stories and many things happening, particularly in special times of the year. Just it was a place for polyglots. This place has been described as people who were Lithuanian, who spoke many, many languages. They had to because there were so many languages being spoken there and so many traditions. They had to be able to communicate with each other. And of course, Maria's mother was a polyglot, just as Maria became a polyglot as well. And they had to communicate, particularly with the people who were coming to their house to benefit from the medicine that her mother and mother's sister, who was also a physician, who were working together there, did. So there was a lot going on, but still within the context of being occupied. So Maria said, we were fighting. The kids were, she said, I would be dropping eggs on the heads of the Polish children. They were just, the kids were fighting. Anyway, but also what was happening is that their home, which was a rather large apartment with a big central area for events, they would frequently mother would have dinner parties, and people who were invited were a part of their the intelligentsia and their extended family, and people who were very, very much connected with the work that they were all doing rather clandestinely still there, of making sure that the old religion was continued, making sure that the arts were continued, making sure that the folklore was not forgotten, because so many people were coming into the area, taking refuge from the wars, that so many things, they were like treasures of an earlier period that then would begin to disappear. And so there was a lot of connection and collection. And so they were meeting about all of those things. They were meeting to have people, play music, but inviting the best musicians, inviting the best people who were poets to recite. And so Maria grew up in that environment of absorbing all of that and meeting these stunning people who were she considered them all part of her family. And some of them were literally part of her family, but part of the extended family. So there was a kind of a kinship. And of course, they were all loving her because she was so dynamic. And she was growing up in that atmosphere. So she also said that she would throw a fit if she wasn't able to be taken care of by someone who knew at least 200 folk songs and folk stories, because her parents were very busy. They couldn't take care of her, and so somebody had to do it. And they realized this was a very important part of her education. And so she would exhaust them basically to hear everything. But she also told me that there was one very nice young lady from one of the villages who was caring for her, who would take her over to the window, particularly when it was frosty and there were patterns on the window. And she'd say, Lima has been here. And she had her look at all the patterns. She said, Lima is, the patterns that are there means that Lima is telling the story of your life. This is what she's saying about you. And it's, you have a wonderful life, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, but the point I'm trying to make here is that there was an association with these goddesses, like Lima, very important goddess, but not the only one, that made the knowledge of this figure intimate, to bring it intimate. So it's not something that's just out there somewhere, but here she is, and she's making these designs on the window for you. And also, I mean, speaking of the death regeneration that Lars was talking about, Lands was talking about, very, very important, because even the death goddess is one to be intimate with, to be honored, because she represents this transition between worlds, and never to be afraid of her, because it's all part of this vibrant reality that we're all living in. And she was receiving that transmission as well. Now, there was a snake goddess, very important snake, that people in the old religion, and still at the time when she was growing up there in Lithuania, that snakes were fed. Snakes were, if there was a snake that was living under your house, you feed it, and it's like, oh, this is good. If a snake goes away, or if someone kills the snake, that is very bad. That's very bad. So everyone was respectful of the snakes. And then there are images of the snake becoming this beautiful goddess who comes to you to relieve your pain and to take you to the next stage of becoming, and so on. So in the stories, particularly in the most ancient of the stories, is that sense that this is the pattern of regeneration that is also a gift to everyone, and not to be afraid. So Maria's parents were very much involved in the necessity to find the proper education for their children, and for all Lithuanian children, and because they absolutely did not want these children to be educated by either Polish or Christian churches. Absolutely not, church education. So they formed a society for the creation of Lithuanian education. The father, at the time that this particular school that Maria attended as a little one was formed, he was the chairman of the board. And she describes walking down the street to have the first day of school, and how exciting that was, and how she loved the school, because the school had all of the arts involved, so that every aspect of learning was part of a kind of discovery and sharing and delight that all of the children shared. And she wrote about that later when she was a bit older, and just to say that this was the kind of education that they needed. And it's quite possible that when Veronica was studying to be a physician down in Germany and in Austria, that she met up with a understanding about met up with Maria Montessori and got some of those ideas for their own use there. But that hasn't been confirmed. But it's something that was told to me by someone close to the family. But in this picture, this very pensive picture of Maria as she's getting a little bit older, the depth and importance of the penetration of the significance of the mythological realm was in her. And every part of nature was named, had names, had stories, had meaning in terms of her life and everyone's life, if they were still inheriting the old way. But at a certain point, Maria's mother moved Vytautas and Maria out of Vilnius area and into Kaunas, which was the which was the area that was not was not occupied, because she did not want to have her children have to go to a school that was not free within free Lithuania. And shortly after that, her father passed away. So that was a shock. There were two shocks involved there. One was leaving her father, whom she adored, and the other was to realize that he was gone altogether. And it took her a long time really to accept that and to realize that she had to deal with it. It was just the reality. And it occurred to her that she had to know what she was going to do. She had to become no longer just a child, but she had to assume the direction of her own life. And so she remembered what her father had told her, and that is, it's in your nature to not to be involved in medicine like your mother and I are involved in, but to be part of the humanities. Find something that connects with what people need in this world, because that's where your gifts will allow you to give something of great importance. And so she recalled that, and she decided, okay, I'm going to follow my father's wishes. And her mother also said, whatever you do, it will keep people from becoming ill. That was a prophecy that her mother gave her. And so she continued to do what her family had done, what her extended family into the 19th century had done, which was to preserve the ancient culture as much as possible. And so this is just a view of one of the houses, the peasant houses, and these ceremonial poles that people built with very special symbolism. And these were being torn down by the time that Christianity started coming in and trying to rid people of the old religion. Basically, people realized, if we don't want to have all of our poles taken down, we have to put some Christian imagery there so that they won't tear them down, and that helped a little bit. So there were these struggles back and forth. So this is Maria here in the center. You can see the really beautiful young one there. And she had just graduated from the gymnasium in Kaunas, which is kind of the equivalent of the preparation school, basically, to go to college. And she had received a massive degree because, a recognition of the excellence of her scholarship. But she carried with her, again, what she had learned from her ancestors. What she had learned from her ancestors, many, many things. And one of them was that her ancestors who, the first recording of what they did, what they believed, and who they were came from the beginnings of the Christian era, when these missionaries started coming in to try to convert what they called these stubborn pagans, and to try to end what they considered really this horrendous belief system of worshiping life on this planet, worshiping the toads and the snakes and everything of the living world, and not being so stupid that they didn't know that they were supposed to worship God, but instead it was everything that was crawling, everything that was flying, everything that was living, and so these people were very determined. And this is another thing that Maria inherited, not only knowing that her ancestors were wedded to a basic respect for the living world, but also a basic ability to say no. You may not control us. You may not destroy from us. And this is way back, hundreds and hundreds of years earlier, before the Russians came in to try to do the same thing to control the population. So she had that a fierceness about her there, knowing that she needed to be one of those stubborn pagans. And so she did. So this is a picture of Vilnius University. And before she went to Vilnius University, before it was even available to the students, she enrolled at Vytautas Magnus University in Kaunas and started studying linguistics, because she thought, okay, Lithuanian language is very important, that she had to study Lithuanian language in all the forms that were being available to students, serious students of linguistics. So she took every course. She said she was in love with her teachers, so she, had to excel. But nevertheless, when she exhausted all of those studies, she was being courted, let's say, to move over into archaeology, by, not courted in the typical way, but to become one of those students, archaeological students, who would carry forth into the future what the finest level of archaeological work could be in Lithuania. And so she did, but she was always interdisciplinary. So not only did she receive an interdisciplinary education from her family, from all of the experiences that she had in doing all of the research that she did on her own and with others to preserve the ancient culture, but also to continue that work with scholars who were really the best in their fields, who were in the university. And so she kept that going and understood that you can't just look through one lens if you're going to understand the past. You have to look through a number of different lenses. And so she developed that from the time she was a language student, from the time that she was studying all of these other interrelated disciplines. Well, by 1939, and that was the beginning of the war, right? The beginning of the Second World War. Everything was crazy. Everything was, but it wasn't as crazy it was going to become. But Stalin was kind of utilizing his powers to kind of trick the Lithuanians to think, oh, I'm going to be really nice to you now, and you actually can go back to Vilnius area because that's going to be free for you now. Well, they thought this is too good to be true, but we're going to take it. And so all the students from the Kaunas University moved to Vilnius, and everyone was incredibly excited to prepare for what will come there. And so Maria continued her work. This is with her boyfriend Jurgis Gimbutas, going to these different places on the periphery where these amazing women were who knew at least 200 songs and stories, and she was recording them as much as she could. And he was taking pictures because he was wanting to look at the architecture, the traditional architecture, and so on. So here's this joy of finally having Vilnius back and finally being able to do all of this work and to have this fluorescence of culture there. And as they were going back to Vilnius, what they found was the Soviet invasion in 1940, which was a tremendous shock. And not only that, but by June of that year, whole families were being deported to Siberia. And horror upon horror upon horror. And these were the people who were the intellectuals, people who were, Maria said, the best people. I mean, the people who were really contributing most to the culture. And it's a wonder that her her family in the area of Kaunas weren't yet taken away. So she said at that time she was still studying and very, very close to getting her master's in archaeology, interdisciplinary studies. And she was writing a lot of articles, and she was doing the best she could to contribute to culture, because that's what she was always told. You had to contribute to culture. You must, whatever you do, you're not just doing it for yourself. It's for the entire culture. And so she got it. Yes, that's it. For the entire culture. But in order to keep her work going without just becoming lost in depression, she said, life twisted me like a little plant, but my work was continuous in one direction. To keep her focus on what was generative and what she had to contribute, and not to lose that. And so that was her focus. In the meantime, she and Jurgis decided to elope and get married, because maybe they would be somehow safer that way, or maybe she would be safer, or maybe if they were married, he would not be just carted away, to work in some factory somewhere. Well, they found out that really wasn't the case, but nevertheless, they did get married, and the next year she had her first child. And her cousin Myler means love, who was also, everybody in the family were just stunning scholars. And Myler was known for someone who single-handedly transformed the educational system of Lithuania after there was a possibility for her to do so, instead of being stopped at every turn. And she described Maria rocking the baby in the what do you put the baby? Yeah, they didn't have with one hand, with one foot. Yeah, rocking the cradle. Thank you, and writing her articles with the other hand, and here it was, and Miley said she was volcanic in her powers and in her focus. So she had to take care of the baby, but she wasn't going to give up, getting her articles done. And in fact, so many of her articles were published still before that was all taken away. Articles about all kinds of different subjects, having to do with prehistory, having to do with the archaeology, having to do this. She even wrote about her school and how important that kind of education was. But during the course of all of that, basically I don't think maybe I missed that the Russians had, the Germans came in. The Germans came in, and at first they thought, well, maybe they're coming to help us because it's really, really awful, with what's happening with the Russians here. But in the meantime, the Lithuanians, the young people had their own uprising, and Maria and Jurgis were part of that uprising with their determination that give us liberty or give us death, basically, and they pushed the weakened Russians out, and the Germans came in, and they realized, well, afterwards, actually, they didn't do anything to liberate us. We liberated ourselves, and in fact, everything got really bad after the Germans came. In fact, this rich system of so many different cultures living in Vilnius became systematically destroyed, and the history, what happened there in terms of the Germans. What happened with the very, very, very strong, very rich Jewish community, which was one of the largest ones outside of not Germany, but anyway, outside of Asia Minor. So all of that was happening and everything being taken apart and all of the grief and all of the horror. In the meantime, that's when they got married. I skipped that. And the Russians started coming back. And they already knew, because when the Russians had fled after the Lithuanian uprising, they left all their papers behind, they left all their plans behind, and they could read, they only got part way with their plans to basically to destroy the intelligentsia, to destroy the population. And we can't stay here if we don't want to end up in Siberia or just killed. And so all of the faculty of the museum, of the university, all of her most treasured teachers also left when Jurgis and Maria and their little baby left. And here they are getting on a boat to take them down the Nemunas River to go west and to finally find their way out of Lithuania, not knowing that they'd ever see her mother again or her auntie. So here they are. But during the course of the being in Europe with the bombs falling, the only direction that they were going was in German occupied zone. That was the only avenue that they could go in. And so they went there, and Jurgis was made sure that he really cared. He took care of Maria. He took care of their baby, and made sure that he knew where they needed to move and when, so that they would not be under the bombs. And so they were able to continue their work, because it's said about people who are refugees, there are two main categories, according to this one treatise that I read, is that either they become so destroyed by it, like they've lost their culture, they've lost who they are, and they just kind of can't function well, or they do what Maria and Jurgis did, which is to keep their trajectory and to figure out, okay, they're not going to be there forever. Where do you want to go? How do you prepare? What language do you need to speak in order to, and so on. Of course, she was already a polyglot. She already spoke English. She already, read in so many languages. But still, to kind of fine tune their ability to communicate, so that whatever direction that they were able to go in at the end of the war, they would be ready. And one of the things they prepared for was to get their doctorates before they left. So they would have their doctorate. They would have everything that they could carry that showed who they were, and then to go and to establish, not just to have to work in a factory somewhere, but really to have something of value that would be of another level. So here they are at the entrance to Tübingen University, and here's their little baby. And here further is the closest entrance to the castle that is still Tübingen University, and that's where she received her doctorate. And the doctorate again was interdisciplinary, and it had to do with looking at the practices of rituals, the rituals around death, and the ideas of the underworld, the death and regeneration, because she wanted to know what happened to my father when he died. It's not just the end. What if she reached back in terms of Lithuanian history and prehistory, whatever she could find, what would tell her about the situation? And so that's what her dissertation was about. And when it was done, they actually were able to publish it, and then she was able to take it with her when they moved. They finally were able to get to the United States. This is the picture that still hangs on the wall of Tübingen University of her, and there were very few women getting their doctorate at that time. And here, the celebration of her doctorate are the finest professors, some of whom were her professors at university, and others just her friends and colleagues who were close enough so they could come and celebrate with her the fact that she achieved her doctorate. And she achieved it in 1 year because she had done most of the work already during the war. And she'd already translated her dissertation into German at the same time, so it could be published in German. And she could have it, because she knew she was going to apply at Tübingen, and she was one of the first students to apply. So this determination was there always. So one of the books she was working on during the war, which she was able to publish in the early years of being in the United States when she was in Harvard, because she went to Harvard, and somebody asked, "Well, where are you going to apply? Where are you going to go?" And she said, "Well, my husband has found a job in, so we're living in Boston area. Excuse me." So her friend said, "Well, go to Harvard. Harvard's right there." She says, "Okay, I will go to Harvard." So she came with her book, and she came in and she presented herself. And basically, once the people were, first of all, they were stunned. Here's this young woman in her 20s, who's appearing, and this was in 1949. Actually, it was 1950 that she finally came there, because she also tried out some jobs, just to earn any kind of money at all, and she realized there's no future in that. So then she decided that she really would just, in 1950, she was going to go to Harvard. And so when they realized, here's this young woman who has a PhD in Eastern European, like Eastern linguistics and interdisciplinary work and knowledge of that area of Europe that people can't even go to now. They couldn't travel to it because of the Cold War. And here she is, and she's a polyglot. She knows all of these languages. She can translate for the scholars here who can't read all that stuff. And she probably would be useful to us. So sure, we'll give you a little table in the basement, and you can work here. But don't ask for any money. And she said, "Fine, I'll start right away." Okay, so one of the books that she completed there, that she had gathered all the work for when she was trying to stay away from the bombs falling, was Ancient Symbolism in Lithuanian Folk Art, which again drew from her inheritance of the ancient ways, because what she could see that was still lingering in Lithuania that was rapidly being destroyed. And here are these the top areas of these poles, these ceremonial poles that were put up by people that were knocked over and then built up again, and then knocked over and built up again. And she wrote about them. Basically, here's one. She says, "It's the iron-tipped wooden cross from the district of Kaunas. Sun disk around a cross arms. Around this cross arms is formed the plant motifs, and it looks like it's just spinning with vitality, and so on." And she talked about in this book how the images arose from the earth, like the plants arose, and there was a sense that there was a continuity between the living world and what was created by people to venerate the living world. So here she is at her home office, doing work. And here's a picture of her mother in front of her and a picture of her holding baby Danuta in her arms from the time that she was a refugee. Because I wanted to tell you that she gave herself impossible tasks always. And when she was at Harvard, she gave herself 2 impossible monographs to create. And both of them were filled with knowledge that only she had. Because, again, in both of these monographs, the first of them is the prehistory of Eastern Europe, and the second is basically the whole Bronze Age cultures in Central and Eastern Europe. A huge tome. I thought I'd bring a copy of it here, but I can't even carry it. It's just too heavy. But in both of those books, she said she realizes that there is no other place, no one else has ever done these books before, because the information is not available. It's not available, particularly of people in the West, because of linguistic and political boundaries. And that she had, in both cases, what she had done is that she gave herself the task of starting at the mid-19th century and going all the way through to the mid, like 1955. And chronicling every single archaeological site that had been explored and written about and published about, or not even published, but still exists in some way. And then sorting out the whole thing. And these are all in different languages, too. And sorting them out so that she could see, well, what was going on in different times? What changes were being made over time? How did certain culture groups move and shift? And this is how she first got her idea about naming the certain people that she called kurgans after their kurgan mounds, after their mounds. And realizing that her naming of people had to do not just with one aspect, but had to do with naming who they were, where they originated, where did they go, what was a commonality to them in terms of the material culture that they represented, and when did they appear at the edges of Europe, and what happened when they continued into Europe. And all of that is encoded in the term, the Kurgan culture, or the Kurgan horizon. Because otherwise, she said, every time that they were described within archaeological treatises, they had different names because they had to do with exactly where they were at certain times and so on. And so she intentionally created names for things in order to identify them. She also was able to make the distinction between what those Kurgan people represented as they were moving along throughout the steppe region and then into Europe, and what was going on in Europe before that period. And she coined the term Old Europe that no one had used before. And what her meaning of the term Old Europe was it had a number of different meanings that all combined together. Old Europe means the non-Indo-European, the non-patriarchal societies of the region. Okay? It's really important to know. And then also that they had qualities that united them. There were a number of different culture groups of Old Europe, but they had similarities, such as they were not warlike. They had developed very, very refined systems of culture systems. Their material culture was over time very refined, and it would take the whole presentation and longer to really talk in any kind of depth about Old Europe and what it contained. But it also contained, importantly, thousands of female figurines that appeared during that period, that were also in Europe in the Paleolithic times, but then also developed with a certain signature that was old European and that was very distinctive for that period of time. And so, of course, that was extremely important for her and for the theories that she had, because again, they connected with what she had inherited as a child about the significance, people's significance of being in relationship with the living world. Not that nature was a background, but that they were intrinsically part of the living world, and that in order for them to survive and to be sustainable, they had to be respectful and they had to have a responsiveness to what nature was needing from them in order for them to continue. So all of this was encoded in this terminology. So prehistory of Eastern Europe. It's incredible, this book. Absolutely incredible. I mean, I spent a lot of time weeping over it because I couldn't believe that what she was doing and how detailed her perceptions were and how she had to figure out about the timing, and because there was no radiocarbon dating at that time. So how do you, I mean, that's a whole other subject in itself. So here she is with all of this knowledge inside her, continuing to give herself impossible tasks. By the time Bronze Age Cultures was published, it was published in The Hague, and basically already by that time she was at UCLA because she left. Okay, 13 years at Harvard, that's enough. They didn't really, there was no future for her there, but she was offered a really cushy position at UCLA, which she said, I'm coming right away. So she moved to she didn't move to Topanga right away, but it didn't take her long to find Topanga and to set up shop there. And her colleague, she had a really great colleague at UCLA who welcomed her by saying she represented the one person in the entire country who understood to the depth that she understood what Indo-European societies were and how to basically work with them in such a way that they could expand the field. And and she did, and she was also the very first person to be able to make a distinction between, within the Lithuanian context, what was Indo-European and what was then part of the earlier structure of the non-Indo-European stratum. And that's another story. So by the time, I'm just going to show you just quickly some of the images that I mean, there was the variety of images found in Old Europe that speak of a consciousness of respect and an ability of artists to create these amazing forms, and they weren't always directly photographic, but they were also symbolic. She talked a lot about the fact that they needed to be understood in terms of symbolism. So look at the huge vulva and the arms in this very this position that is typical in many different styles, holding the breasts, presenting the breasts, and then what is this? And all of the carvings, all of the incisions on the body, using the body as a canvas for the expression of ideas. The seated form with like the old grandmother sitting on sitting outside the houses of so many of these very, very old European villages. And here she is with her double spiral on her vulva, and then all this swirling of designs on her torso, as though she's sitting at the center of the world. And then the combination of the animal and human. And this is a mask that's in the size of that could be worn in ceremony. Female images that are indicate rituals. Here are others. And interesting, I photographed these in Romania for an exhibition, and I happened to pick one of them up and turn it sideways, and I just like gasped, because on the underside, if you turn it in a certain way, it's the scrotum and phallus. And you turn it this way and turn it around, and you'd never know the difference, right? And that's not the only image that combines male and female. There are many, many that also go back into Paleolithic times. The spirals that spiral in, the spirals that spiral out. And these show that it's not just what looks from the outside, but if you blow them up, you can see that whoever was doing it obviously with a sense of as a meditation, because there's so much working and reworking happening. And I do want to say one thing about these. Notice there's so many of the ceramics that have these designs on them, and if you follow them spiraling all the way around, you get to the center, and it turns around and spirals the other way. Okay, so one polarity becomes the other, and then that polarity becomes the other, and the whole thing all the way around is interconnected, the interconnection of all things. Once again, these rhythmic interconnections, the interconnections of all things. And this huge vase in mid-Romania of the whole movement of nature, this consonant that is part of who we are as human beings on this planet. And this one, the Kukenden, I have to just explain this, because you serpentine lines coming in, and you see the little marks on between the as though the space is not empty. The space is alive, almost with an electric charge. But all of nature is alive. And then, of course, I have no time to mention her excavations, in which she found phenomenal things that really opened the field. All right, so I'm very grateful to Lance and to the entire crew for being willing to extend a few more minutes for me. That's really very gracious, and I will make a super attempt not to go over that. But I've taken the imagery back, as you see, to an earlier slide that I didn't really comment on because I realized that time was wasting. But it's so important, this work that she did in the early stages and within the first two monographs, when she was just in her 20s, and she was drawing from all of the experience that she had in Lithuania, the intensive work as an Indo-Europeanist, as a linguist, as one who was exploring everything that the universities had to give her, and then to take it from there. So when she worked on these two monographs that basically looked at all of the excavations from the middle of the 19th century all the way to 1955, and then tracing what happened that no one else had done because of the problems with the non-access to the material, and also because who would do it? I mean, it's just a huge job. And she was able to draw from her life experience of being a polyglot and all of the different languages that were used in these excavations, and to be able to piece it all together so that she could then you could look at this map here and see that here's the Black Sea. Clearly, you see the Black Sea, and then you see all the arrows of the movements of peoples from north of the Black Sea, this whole region that it's thought to be the inception, the location of the beginning of the Indo-European project. The peoples that spoke what is linguistically called an Indo-European language, meaning that there are relationships between this language form from Europe and all the way down into the Indus Valley region. And one of the things that really captivated Maria as a young person studying Indo-European, everything that could be offered to her about the Indo-European project was the fact that what was available in Europe was connected to, and this was a big question for her when she was a young student. Why is Lithuanian language very similar to Sanskrit? Because they're so far apart. Why would that be? And it was a mystery that went with her entire life. And there are many different scholars who have tried to make sense out of that. And she has her own sense of it, but I can't get into that right now because it's another huge subject. But there is a link, a very vast link, linguistically and culturally. And what she found then, as I spoke very briefly yesterday in terms of the development of these two monographs, was that peoples developed in this area north of the Black Sea, in the steppe region, the Volga region, and gradually came down into the area that was the entrance to Europe. And as they moved, what are called the kurgans, which are the mounds, the burial mounds, also moved as an indicator of the movement of these peoples. And the similarity was very clear in terms of looking at what was contained within these kurgan burials. And there was a tremendous similarity all the way through of the use of weapons, the use of the way particularly the male burials were treated as the power of the male within the kurgan, and then the kurgan burials itself, and then when there were female burials, they were generally seen as subsequent to the male, although there are some variations of that as well. So these came down all the way down to the place where the beginning of what we could call the European area, and then to see already she had identified another culture system altogether that she eventually named Old Europe, the non-Indo-European, the non-patriarchal, the non-male dominated area that had a very, very, very different social structure that she was able to discern after many, many years of study, and also the physical creations that took place. I mean, the development of the elegance of the ceramics, the elegance of the systems of burials, the systems of creation of their habitation sites, and so on, all the way through, totally vastly different from what was then in the East. But when the Indo-European peoples began to move in to Europe, changes took place, and she chronicled all of those changes. And she chronicled them in terms of looking at the initial excavations that were done and how they were described and so on. And that was something that, as I said before, had never happened up until that time, because it was the sum total of everything that could be found of the burials and the descriptions of the burials in the very earliest, the first 100 years of excavation. And so she had it all at her disposal, and she described it, and then she interpreted it as well. And from that, it was the basis, from those two monographs, it was the basis of her theories that came later. And what came later is something very, very significant to all of us, whether we know it or not, basically, because she was saying that when these these people came down with their horses, with their weapons, and with the kind of influence that they had in Europe. The changes that took place really changed the face of Europe. And she also described what she called the hybridization between two peoples. And of course, she had the possibility of using the DNA material, which has come forth later, to verify that. And it was also earlier mentioned that her colleague Colin Renfrew, who gave this very, very special lecture in her honor at the Oriental Institute in Chicago several years ago, basically said, okay, she was right, because it's the material that's coming forth now with scientific, very, very highly regarded and highly respected information coming forth about the DNA, is saying that everything that she said was right. And that's a huge, like a bombshell went off, basically, because he was contrasting his theory with hers, and now he's seeing, okay, I'm going to jump out ahead of the critics, because the critics are all going to say, look, this is showing that Renfrew was really wrong. And basically now he's saying, in his very gallant way, because he was really quite a gentleman, that Maria was right. So he got to have that entree into the next stage of research and recognizing her. So that triggered, interestingly, reading the literature, and you may, go into the literature that's come forth since then, with some of her colleagues going, okay, that was very upsetting, because they were very happy to have her kind of thrown off the table, and saying that, okay, well, she couldn't possibly be speaking something that we could take as true until Renfrew and the genetic material coming in. And so they were kind of wanting to know what to do with that now. What do you do with her being called right? And it's a fascinating series of discussion about that's happened over time. And I'm not going to get into that right now, but it's something really remarkable. David Anthony has written something particularly poignant about that. And again, you'll have to find it yourself, I'm sorry to say. But so anyway, getting back to this, and we'll move forward then after I make a few statements here. One of the things that Maria insisted was extremely important about this, what she called the collision of cultures between the Indo-European and the non-Indo-European societies, is that this collision, as I previously mentioned, changed the face of Europe, and it caused a hybridization between those two very distinctive forms that has come down to us all the way through to now. Every single one of us who has seen this material Maria was bringing out for the first time, and have recognized, like, somehow I've been dreaming these goddesses. I don't know why, but they're so familiar to me, or I've been painting them, or so many things were happening as a result of suddenly being presented with this rich material that wasn't available before. Well, one could say that there's a very, very deep memory that we carry of all the different levels of human experience. That's one explanation, and people have their own explanations for it. But one of the things that Maria emphasized was that there was a continuity of the old European level that came all the way down, and that certain times would trigger like underground water coming up, and that it would arise, and rituals would continue that perhaps hadn't continued before or had gone underground. But the sum total of her description of what happened after what she called the collision of cultures was that the even though the Bronze Age took over, the male dominance took over, the Indo-Europeanization took over and seemed to be like covering everything, it didn't cover everything, because at the same time there was a hybridization between these two systems, and they continue to arise. And so many people have done research in villages, in different areas of old Europe, finding that even now there are continued rituals that are done that can be traced all the way back to the early times. And certainly much has been said about Crete as a very prime place of the continuity of these old European patterns and so on. So it's not gone. And we find it within ourselves. You know, when you discover, how do I know this? Or how do I feel this connection to the living world that is significant, and this sense of kinship that so many of us have with the sculptures from the Neolithic, and this need to create it ourselves, to be the ones that are using the clay, that are making the marks, that are doing it, because it feeds our soul to have that intimate connection. So the collision of cultures, Maria said that if we do not understand the significance of the collision of cultures between these two very, very, very different systems, we can never understand the subsequent development of European civilization or European societies, because all of us of European origin are mixtures of the old European level, the deep old European level, and the Indo-European level that is more obvious. And yet it's all within us, and certain things rise up within us as a way of recognizing what is deep and what is rich within us. But we cannot understand, for instance, the impression, the how we have all been influenced, obviously, most obviously, by the Indo-European level, because that's the warfare, and that's all the weapons, and that's the dominance from above, and so on, and all those different ways that's expressed. So collision of cultures, if you look into Maria's work and you want to know what she said about the collision of cultures, of course she talks about it in The Civilization of the Goddess, which was her magnum opus, when she brings everything together. So I'm just going to leave that, but the collision of cultures, understanding that what we carry within us are those the concentration between those two levels is important to understand. I'm just going to skip forward here past some of these amazing images that I showed as a glimpse yesterday that indicate the ritual life of the old European peoples. Okay, well, if you read her work, read The Civilization of the Goddess, and she talks about all these different things that we've missed here. But thank you very much. Thank you. Okay.